Why does former Obama Border Patrol Chief Mark Morgan see the crisis at the southwest border as the worst in American history? And how are cartels and coyotes adapting their strategies to exploit weaknesses in current border security? What could Congress do to reduce the crisis? And why is it not taking the steps to do that? This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Today, our border security reporter Charlotte Cuthbertson sits down with Mark Morgan, who was U.S. Border Patrol Chief under President Obama and is also a 20-year veteran of the FBI. We discuss the roots of the crisis, the day-to-day obstacles facing Border Patrol agents, judicial activism affecting their efforts, and how the situation at the southern border has changed rapidly over recent years.
So, we've got record numbers already 7 months into the year. We've already surpassed last year's numbers. And there's a new caravan on the way. I've heard 10,000 to 20,000 people. What are the likely scenarios here?
Well, so it really depends. I think a couple of things that it illustrates, I think, is one is just another example, another fact that this is a crisis, right? We're talking about a caravan now, 10, 20,000. I think the other thing that's important that illustrates is the failure of the government of Mexico to be a proactive partner in resolving this problem. Their southern border is completely unsecure, and the border between Mexico and the United States, the cartels own it. So it really does show the government of Mexico's inept ability to handle this issue. But now, with the president making the threats that he's making to close down the border, now we see the government of Mexico finally starting to step up. And right now, we're seeing reports that caravan of 20,000 or so is being broken up. But mark my words, they're still going to get here. And right now, because the laws are still the same, so Congress has still failed to do their job to protect the American people, so the same laws apply. So there's a good chance that the majority of these individuals are still going to be allowed into the interior United States. Now, with one exception, if the president is able to continue to do the new approach that he has, the migrant protection protocol, to make the individuals seeking asylum remain in Mexico, there's a chance that those numbers could be reduced. But right now, that's only be done at the ports of entry. So these folks coming in, if they get here, they're going to be allowed in.
And there's no incentive for them to go to the ports of entry, one, because the smuggling networks don't want them to. They want to use them to bring drugs around them and tie up Border Patrol. So although the migrant protection protocol sounds good, in practice it's not really having a big impact, is it?
No, right now I think only about 2,000 have remained in Mexico. And so you're absolutely right. For the protection protocols to really work, they're going to have to apply that along the whole southwest border, at the ports and in between the ports. Because like you said, that'll actually just incentivize even more for them to come illegally and for the cartels to continue to exploit not only the migrants, but also our resources along the border. You're absolutely right.
So I heard a statistic by Rio Grande Valley, Texas Border Patrol Chief Karish a couple of weeks ago in a hearing. He said in 2014, of all of the men that Border Patrol apprehended, less than 1% had brought a child with them. That number is now at 50%. What's the difference there? What's going on there?
Well, so that's a great stat. I'd add another stat too. If you look from 2014 as well, what you saw in 2014, the phenomenon that we saw, and I do believe was created from DACA, was that at first you saw mainly unaccompanied minors. But now fast forward to 2019, now we see actually family units exceed the number of unaccompanied minors. And you're also seeing now adult males with children. What has happened? Well, what has happened is they've gotten more educated, right, in Northern Triangle countries. They fully understand through social media, through the cartels, through non-governmental organizations, and through their own family members that have come here in the United States. So they know now, you grab a kid, you're in. They understand that with the Flores Settlement Agreement and TVPRA, that I think those two things are what really creates catch and release. They know it, and it's working. grab a kid, and you're in. And so now you've seen a complete change in that demographics because of that, and now you're seeing adult males coming along. And it goes even further. The children are being exploited, right? So the cartels are using the children to, again, jack up money. So an adult male, I want to get across, so I'll pay the cartels to basically rent the kid, right? You rent the kid, and you get in. It's horrendous.
And so this number from fewer than 1% to 50%, that can't in any way be attributed to some kind of catastrophic events in their home country that happened between 2014 and now.
No, and so that's a great question. That's another false narrative. So if you look at the Northern Triangle countries, whether you look at their violence, whatever element you look at, it ebbs and flows, right? But yet the numbers from the Northern Triangle countries have continued to skyrocket that are coming. Why? It's not what's happening in the Northern Triangle countries. It's what's happening in the United States. It's the Congress' failure to address this problem again and again. And the Northern Triangle countries getting more educated, and they're getting more support, and the cartels being involved. They know once they get here, they're in. The Border Patrol and ICE are so overwhelmed right now that a lot of these migrants coming, they're not even asserting credible fear or asylum, and they're still being allowed in because the agencies are overwhelmed.
Yeah, actually, I was in Yuma last week, a couple of weeks ago, and the Border Patrol chief there said 90% of the people that are crossing illegally are not asylum cases. They don't even claim credible fear, but they know the game. Now, I've also heard that there are websites and WeChat groups that are, I guess, educating the migrants on what to say, what to do, even coordinates of where to cross the border. Is that, what do you know about that?
All of that is correct. And I'll give you a step further. The cartels, like a lot of the caravans starting, the cartels aren't starting those caravans. They don't need to, because there's non-governmental agency and other non-profit organizations that are actually starting the cartels. But make no mistake, the cartels own that border. And so as they start coming through, they're going to tax them, and then they'll actually take the caravans, no matter how big or small, and they'll actually direct them to certain areas they want to go so the Border Patrol can be engaged, and then they'll sneak criminal aliens in and bad things in. And so it's absolutely being done every day.
And just to go back to, sneaking bad people in, so far in the first 6 months of of the fiscal year 2019, 25,000 people in the Rio Grande Valley have evaded Border Patrol. So that's just the Rio Grande Valley in Texas in one sector. 25,000. And give us a little insight. Who are they? Where are they going? What are they doing here?
So I'm glad you asked that, and that's because we focus so much on the humanitarian crisis. Those families, unaccompanied minors, come from the Northern Triangle. We've forgotten about the other part of this national emergency, the national threat that we face because of the southwest border. So although 65% are family units, unaccompanied minors, that still leaves 35% of people coming across that they're not all good, and this is the false narrative. And to be able to really have a discussion, we have to be intellectually honest. All these individuals coming through, they're not good people. Some of them are rapists, some of them are murderers, some of them are pedophiles, some of them are gang members. This year already, Border Patrol's already apprehended as many gang members so far in the first 6 months than they did all of last year. So that's a fact. It's not hyperbole, and we need to make sure we're being intellectually honest. And that's just who we're apprehending. Again, the border is still 60% wide open, meaning it doesn't have enough infrastructure, technology, or personnel. And because anywhere from 25 to 40% of Border Patrol resources are being pulled away and dedicated to humanitarian, the border is even more wide open for the cartels to do what? Exploit, to bring drugs, contraband, and bad people in.
The Yuma Border Patrol chief, actually, he said he's got 50 to 60% of his manpower in this humanitarian effort not controlling the border, and all 3 of his highway checkpoints are closed right now. And those checkpoints last year they seized, I think it was 1,800 pounds of methamphetamine. He's talking about how that's now just flowing straight into America everywhere.
Absolutely. And so to put it in perspective, so when I was there in 2016 as the chief, I estimated about 15% of the Border Patrol agent resources were pulled off the line to do humanitarian, what I would kind of tongue-cheek refer to daycare providing. They really were. I mean, some of these individuals, these gun-toting, highly trained, highly experienced agents were, part of their job was to make sure we had enough baby diapers and baby formula and et cetera to provide the care for these individuals. And that was a complete crisis, from my opinion, that I had 15% resources. And now, just like you said, in some sectors, it's up to 40% of the Border Patrol resources are being pulled off the line. Again, we have to be intellectually honest. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see what that does to the border. It's wide open, and the cartels are exploiting this every single day. They're directing the caravan to go to point A, knowing full well that point B is going to be wide open and then get through anything that they want, and it's happening every day.
Is it that Congress doesn't understand the magnitude of the problem, or is it playing politics?
So this is a tough question for me to answer because I'm not a political guy. I'm a law enforcement guy. So I've been really trying hard to just look at this from facts and historical data and not put myself in the political arena. But after serving this country for 30 years and knowing this border, both from an FBI perspective and a Border Patrol perspective, you can only draw one conclusion because the facts are there. What we need to do is very clear. Congress needs to fix the Florida Settlement Agreement, TVPRA, catch and release ends. This problem, 85%, Congress could fix in 15 minutes by doing those two things, and they know that. So I can only draw one conclusion, that they're not doing this based on their political agenda and their ideology. For me, I can draw no other conclusion from a law enforcement perspective because they know. The experts have been telling them for a very long time what they need. The experts have been telling them for a long time that they need more infrastructure, technology, and personnel and where they need it. They've never said they need it from sea to shining sea. They said they need it in strategic locations, and it works, and they have the historical data. Right now, last month, over 100,000. We're going to expect 1 million this year. That's not hyperbole, that's fact. You know, the former DHS Secretary, Jay Johnson, he said, a bad day, and I was the Border Patrol chief under Jay Johnson, he said a bad day for him was 1,000 apprehensions. We're getting 4,000 a day now. And he says, right, in anybody's definition, it has a crisis. So Congress, they absolutely know the facts, and they know this is a crisis, and they know it's getting worse, yet they're doing nothing. For me, I can only draw one conclusion.
But why would they, what is the reason they want this to continue? What is the real reason anyone in American politics would want the border to be open?
So, look, I don't want to get into the minds of the politicians. I really don't. All I want to make sure as American people know is that this is absolutely a crisis. And that it's not just for the border cities or the border towns. Every city in this country is a border city. These individuals coming across are entering every major metropolitan city in this country, and there's a taxpayer burden that goes along with that. But we have to remember, a lot of times, again, we get sidetracked with the individuals coming over here either legally or those that are claiming asylum. We forget to talk about the ones that are entering illegally that are bad people. There are. What about the thousands and thousands of angel families, the thousands and thousands of American citizens that have been killed by illegal aliens that had ICE detainers, multiple ICE detainers that should not have been here? Those are lives that could have been prevented. So when we're talking about this, people have to realize everybody coming in here is not good, but our system is so overwhelmed, our laws are so broke, we don't know who's coming in. It has to be fixed.
Okay, so let's say Congress does nothing, which is a high potential. How can this be fixed without the Flores and the TVPRA being tweaked?
So I think that is probably the most important question. I wish more journalists and reporters would be asking that question, because in my opinion, so we have to change our complete mindset. And I know that the former secretary, which I have immense respect for, and all the other agency heads, they've been pounding hard, and I still do it too. Congress. They're not going to fix this. Congress is not going to fix this. Next month, we're going to get 120,000 coming in. We're going to have a caravan of 10 or 20,000. Congress is going to stop that. So what can we do right now? The first thing I think we need to do is we need to change our mindset. We need to stop thinking that the Northern Triangle countries are going to fix this in the short term, that Mexico is going to be a partner in the short-term fix, or that Congress is going to be a partner in the short-term fix. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we still don't work with the Northern Triangle's Mexico Congress. We have to, but those are long-term, if at all is going to happen. I mean, we've given hundreds of millions of dollars to the Northern Triangle countries forever, and what has happened? The numbers continue to skyrocket. We've been working with Mexico for decades to try to get them to be part of the solution here, and they failed. They're still on the sidelines. We've been working with Congress for decades to fix this, and they failed. So from my perspective, we need to change our mindset and look at what can this administration do and what can DHS do right now to fix this problem without relying on Congress. And there's a couple of things. We need to look at the regulations that handles credible fear. We need to improve the burden of proof, because we know that 85% of the claims are found to be unsubstantiated. So we know that there's an issue with the credible fear. It's too loose. We need to tighten that up. I think we need to pass a regulation that will actually give ICE the ability to detain family units while they're going through the immigration process. And at the same time, let's reinstitute what they used to do called port courts. That means we shove all the assets, a whole government approach down to the border, everything that you need, soup to nuts, to be able to have an immigration hearing and do that quickly. And then if those claims are found to be substantiated, then they'll be allowed in. If not, we remove them immediately. And the last thing that I would do that closes that incentive package that's out there, because again, they're not coming here because of what's going on in the Northern Triangle countries. They're coming here for economic equality. That's it. And to some degree, family reunification. So we need to remove that incentive. And so the last part of that is we need to ramp up our interior enforcement. There's over a million illegal immigrants who entered the country illegally, filed a false claim, have received due justice through the immigration proceedings, and they've found to be false, and they've received a deportation order of removal, 1 million, and they still remain here illegally. And we're not doing anything about it. Criminals, I say let's start. Look, I don't want to worry about the sanctuary countries, cities. I want to go to the sheriff of Pima County, one of the largest border counties in the United States, who supports what the president's doing. I want to go to him and I want to work with him and say, okay, let's identify the illegal aliens that are criminals in your county and let's go get them. And that needs to be done across America. So I do think there's things that we can do right now, but we have to change our mindset. We can't wait for Congress. We need to act ourselves.
Are all of those things possible for the administration to do without judicial interference?
Well, so that's the other thing, right? You're spot on. I mean, every single time that Congress fails to do what they do and this White House tries to do something, what happens? Either Congress, the very entity that's not doing their job, then they put roadblocks up every time the White House tries to do their job. And then judicial activism. I've never seen judicial activism, and I've been doing this for 30 years now. I've never seen judicial activism at the height as it is now, especially on this issue. Every time it turns around, they try to do something to stem the flow to address this issue. And a lower court ruling, the latest one, the Ninth Circuit, a judge from 400 miles away says, no, they can't remain in Mexico. It's just incredulous to me. So I hope, and they are, I think the president, I hope, and again, I always say if I have 5 minutes, I tell him, Mr. President, sir, stay the course, fight it, take that to the Supreme Court, because if he could win in the Supreme Court about making the asylum seekers remain in Mexico, that's huge. I mean, right there is a game changer to be able to do that. And I mark my words, if they're able to make the individuals wait in Mexico, if we can apply the migrant protection protocols along the whole southwest border and make individuals wait in Mexico, you're going to see those numbers go drastically down because you've removed the incentive. You now will be telling them, no, you don't get to grab a kid and get a free pass in the United States. We've taken that away. You're going to see the numbers go down.
But what incentive does Mexico have to support that, the Migrant Protection Protocol? Because they would have to be a willing partner in that, wouldn't they?
So that's the issue. And in Mexico, it's a very complicated issue, and that's why, to some degree, again, I'm not saying we stop working in Mexico, but we got to stop thinking and relying that they're going to be, huge partners, because why? The cartels. As long as the cartels are profiting from this immigration, Mexico is going to be stymied to some degree what they're going to be able to do about it, because the cartels own that country. As soon as it stops becoming profitable, starts becoming an issue for the cartels, then you'll see them go back to their old ways of just doing drugs again. So that's an issue that's got to be addressed. For Mexico to be a really valuable player in this, we have to address the cartels. But here's another thing. Let's force Mexico to deal with the cartels a little bit more. And I think the president's threats of shutting down the border is having an impact. They're going to, yes, we'll take a hit too short term, but Mexico will take a much larger hit if we shut down the border than we will. And I think that threat is having an impact on Mexico.
Why is it different now? The numbers aren't as large, but it's more of a crisis. Why is that the case?
So that's another great question, and that's another one of those of multiple false narratives that I've been trying to address. So back in the 90s and early 2000s, I think we reached a height of about 1.5 million. But the difference, there are two distinct differences that really drive this false narrative. First is the recidivism false narrative, is that the individuals coming across, they were being caught and sent back 2 or 3 times at the same day. Some Border Patrol agents were catching the same person 2 or 3 times in the same shift, right? So really, if you look at that 1.5, it's really probably around 1 million or even less of actual numbers. The second part of that false narrative is that people don't tell the American people about is that 99% of them were Mexican adults, of which we were catching, and within a couple hours, through expedited removal, we were removing 90% of them. So think about it, about 1 million, but we were removing 90%. Now this year, we're anticipating 1 million, but 65% of them are family units, unaccompanied minors, and because of our broken laws, they get to come in, which means 650 to 700,000 this year are going to be allowed into the interior United States. So that's why it's no comparison from back in the 90s to now. And that's why I've been actually saying the crisis that we're facing right now is the worst in our history along the southwest border because of that.
And I think the deportation rate of family units that are found to not have credible fear claims is about 2%. So if you look at that 650 to 750,000, they've got a 98% chance of staying indefinitely if they can get across with a child. So it's a pretty huge incentive. And
what the American people need to understand too is not only is that an incentive, is that right now, especially right now, you grab a kid, you're in. You're in the United States, and it's almost de facto amnesty. Nothing's going to be done about you. And what the American people should realize, of that 650,000 that we're going to let in, 85% of that, their claims are going to be found to be false, and they're going to be given an order of deportation, of which they're not going to comply with it. And so each year, each month, we're adding tens of thousands of people that now have been ordered removed and are here illegally, and we're not doing anything about it, and the taxpayers are footing the bill.
And then I guess looking at it from a humanitarian perspective, if you think that only, say, 10% of those are, at the end of the day, granted asylum, humanitarian-wise, America is now so bogged down with that other 90% that they can't address the really true humanitarian asylum cases that are out there that really do need help, that is a true asylum case.
So I was just having that discussion with somebody the other day, and that's another issue that I see journalists and reporters not really talking about, right? There is a fairness issue to those that have legitimate asylum claims. They're getting lost in the quagmire of the 90% that are filing false claims, and they know it. So when I say to establish those port courts, establish a whole government approach, try to expedite that and get this done in an expeditious manner, if you have true asylum claims, that's what you're going to want. You're not going to want to have to wait 2 years for that to happen. If you have a legitimate claim, I think you would want to have that. You would encourage to have those expedited proceedings so that your claim could be adjudicated fairly and quickly, and then you can move on with your life. So I think that's a great point, and I agree with that.
So Mark, I really appreciate you coming in. I know your time's tight.
Absolutely.
So.